Huples cat. Is there such a thing as an ordinary Briton? I know I'm a Briton, and I'm not that ordinary. Now I know those people living in England will listen to me and say, you're American. I'm not. I'm British. Over here in North America, they hear me as British. However, I'm definitely not ordinary, hopefully in a good way, and I hope you all are as well. So the Guardian newspaper looked at 5 people in Britain who were preppers, who had become preppers because of Brexit, and looked at what they were prepping for, what they'd done, and what they were doing now as time had gone on from Brexit. There's 3 women and 2 men. It's just interesting to me as a prepper what mainstream media portrays us as. It actually does have some interesting points in it. They're actually of value, and it's a short article, and you can read the article, or you can watch this, or you can do both. In the article, none of the 3 women are photographed, but both of the boy preppers are. In this particular case, the women are smarter. Do you really want to have your photograph, and in some cases here, the outside of your house, in a national newspaper saying you've got preps? Might be biased, but nurses are very smart, and nurse practitioners are the smartest. It is of course the Guardian, she's of course a Guardian reader, so the shortages that she was preparing for initially were vital ingredients for spaghetti bolognese. Very important things like olives, sun-dried tomatoes and tomato sauce. However, as much as people want to sneer at that, I actually think it's a great place to start prepping, for food prepping. Like, figure out what you really love in terms of food and prep the ingredients that you would need to make that food after a nuclear fallout event, or after a nuclear war, after a major power outage for 3 weeks. If you actually prep for the foods you love, it's going to make it a lot easier to get basics later on. Anyhow, after making sure she could make spag bog in case of a terrible Brexit, she then says that she actually collected Calpol. Now, for those people who don't know what Calpol is, and I didn't, I had to look it up, it's Tylenol, acetaminophen, paracetamol. It's all the same ingredient, and it's a very smart choice. They won't go off for 10, 20 years if kept clean and dry and out of humidity and without sunlight falling on them. Aspirin will go off in a year or 2. As soon as aspirin smells of vinegar, it's now a poison. And I find, I don't know, I haven't got any evidence of it, but I find that ibuprofen from my stocks that are years old, after a year or 2, I don't find the ibuprofen works at all for me in terms of analgesia. She then, having covered her spaghetti bolognese and her headache issues, she then of course got involved and started to get more basic foodstuffs. But she found that in March of 2020 something else happened. However, having a store of foodstuffs at home and toilet roll and other stuff meant she didn't have to go out shopping with the crowds of crazy people as the infection hit. This is also an absolutely key part of my own personal prepping. Non-cooked foods to eat easily without much preparation when you are sick or in a rush or on the go are an absolute vital component of prepping. So Angie's going to prep you for economic systems failure, war and climate change. This seems to me a bit overwhelming, and it would to her, except she didn't bother doing individual preps for those in specifics. What she's done is basic prepping for all of them, and that's the way to go. Now, I think she's involved in other preppers, either online or in person, because she mentioned heirloom seeds. Again, you'll hear heirloom seeds mentioned over and over and over. You really need heirloom seeds, but any seeds will feed you. But heirloom seeds will keep growing seeds for you in the future. Now, if you've never saved seeds, having heirloom seeds is not the time to learn after an event how to save seeds. So you need heirloom seeds, but you actually need to practice saving seeds beforehand. She says she doesn't expect to get official help in a major event, like nuclear war or massive ongoing climate change or economic systems collapse. And I think she's right. I think most of us would agree with that. Local communities, local networks is where we'll get our help from, where we will give our help in a major ongoing event. Martin has his preps out. Red wine, the #1 prep. I don't know about you, but not having a bug out back now seems nuts to me. It's like not having a substantial car kit, driving around with a car with no food or water or clothing in it or shelter in it. Strikes me as bizarre. And yet I can remember when it sounded nuts to me to do stuff like that, to have things like that. Like Angie, Martin's prepped for multiple events, and I think this is the way to go. Don't assume what's going to happen and believe it, especially if you're learning it from somebody online. But just be multiple prepared. Have various things that will work for various scenarios, and think about various scenarios, not one specific one. Rotating stocks, buying when it's on discount in bulk. Absolutely great. I like his idea of having 2 boxes for normal people, like a big box in a garage or in a basement, and a smaller box of other stuff that's accessible quickly where you are in the house. I really like that idea. I of course have more than 2 boxes. I build boxes continually. I don't just prep and stop. I would point out to you that freezers need electricity, and meat in fact is murder. A written plan is a wonderful idea to avoid emotional reactions and buying, especially as the news and repeat media becomes grimmer and grimmer every day. I would argue that the willingness to use your preps for strategic or short-term need is actually prepping. If you don't use your preps when you have a need to avoid economic pain or to help with a shortage or to avoid going to the shops in a pandemic, that's not prepping. What you're doing is hoarding. Yeah, okay. But in my opinion, and I'll keep saying this, a rocket stove, specifically for me a BioLite stove, but a rocket stove that uses small amounts of wood, is reusable, and in my case it can produce a little bit of electricity, is by far the better option than a single-use barbecue tray or even barbecue or propane of any description. All of that stuff over a sufficient period of time will run out. Great idea to have small propane stoves for short-term duration emergencies where the power's out for 24 hours or 40 hours. Totally agree with that. You may not necessarily want to crank up a wood stove in your house, but at the same time, if you're going to prep for a long-term emergency, propane is not, and never will be, the way to go. Feeling smug is absolutely fine, but get over it. You don't need to feel smug. Murphy's Law is always out there. In fact, Murphy's Laws are always out there, ready to get you. Don't be smug. Be confident, but don't be too confident. Cool on you, Laura. I really like this. One, for imagining that fiction could be fact. That's an important step in prepping. And also for calling your prepping hoarding. You're not ashamed of it. Good for you. I think there's many things wrong with the book The Road. Certainly many things wrong with the film. But it's a good idea to actually identify what triggers you to prep and to make sure it's still relevant. And in terms of The Road, it's still relevant. Ecological disaster from whatever cause on that scale is something I think you should prep a little bit for. Water for a week? How many of you out there have water stored in your house, not able to collect it or store it or treat it, but actually have potable water right now stored for your use for an entire week? I don't. I think food for 6 months is a great period of time. You can stretch that to a year with a bit of suffering. But here in southern Canada land, I actually would think a minimum of 13 months of normal food storage is absolutely essential for any massive event. But that said, most people in the world don't have 6 days supply. In fact, I bet a lot of people watching this video don't have 28 days food supply for their entire family and anybody that might show up in an emergency. Laura's got solid basics here, and I really love her description of having legally obtained medications. Yeah, if you can, it's legal, buy pet medications. They're all absolutely perfectly fine for human beings. But know about antibiotics and know about infections and know which antibiotics to use and how to use them and how to monitor them. It's not just that you could buy out penicillin and use it when you've got a cough. That's not how life is. You're actually going to have to take a lot of responsibility. She also rotates the food stocks to avoid spoilage, and I think this is a really good idea. And it's more of a dramatic thing. So basically you have a pantry, most people do. What you do is you fill the pantry with stuff that over time, using discount buying, fill it full of stuff you actually use day to day. And then you rotate it day to day. So you don't just use the stuff at the front that you put in, you use the stuff at the back and push it back. So you actually can do that. And people have designs for this and all the rest of it. I'm not that organised. I just buy food and use food. And a lot of my food's expired and some of it won't be edible if I need it in a nuclear emergency, but most of it will be. Having moved once as a prepper, I really sympathise with her moving 3 times. A nightmare situation, to be honest with you. Faced with COVID, her physical condition and no home deliveries early on in COVID, she had the supplies in place to look after herself. Except she didn't, did she? But what she did was she adapted. She used oatcakes and peanut butter for weeks to get sufficient calories inside her to actually be able to function until she could get food delivered or if it was safe to go out. That kind of willingness very early on in a crisis to go from absolute normal in March of 2020, by April of 2020, to actually live for 6 weeks off oatcakes and peanut butter, that's the type of person that you want in your prepping group. That's the sort of person you want to be. I do recommend oatcakes. This is the nutritional information on oatcakes. I think it's a really important thing to stock stuff like this that does have some fats in it. Remember, any amount of fat in quantity in food will go rancid. These tend to last forever, and you can soak them in water to eat and make a porridge out of them. I'd been on about oatcakes for a while to Kitty, but we hadn't actually seen any vegan products, and we found it finally. And I actually bought these purely because of this article. Nikki programmed herself via her reading. I advise reading, especially as a prep. So for Nikki, swine flu was actually her trigger. In some areas of the world, like mine, swine flu really didn't happen, but it didn't spread. There was no real infections of any scale. What Nikki did was she kept monitoring globally the news for signs of new infections long after swine flu in 2009 faded out. And that's really interesting. So for 11 years she kept her interest in infectious disease pandemic preparation going. I think 30 days of food is a bit scanty and I'd be uncomfortable having that little, but for something like COVID it was actually fine. The generator made me laugh. One of our friends' husbands actually bought a generator and stored some gas very early on in COVID. In fact, what I've heard is a lot of people actually did who weren't prepping, actually bought generators very early on in COVID because I guess some news report had suggested there would be power outages. Plan for no electricity. Don't think that you can get gasoline to run generators. But to be honest with you, with something like a pandemic, that's way, way down the list of things you should be worried about. Scanning and acting before the herd does is a critical prepping skill. In her case, wearing a mask for her commute was absolutely essential to prevent herself catching an airborne pandemic in the early phase. Remember, when she's wearing this mask, like I was in my hospital, we were being told it wasn't airborne, even though it clearly was. So at this point, she actually went to a 30-day food and water supply. Now, 30 days of water is a huge volume. Kind of smart. You can get collapsible water containers. There's lots of things you can do to do that. But I think it was kind of an interesting thing. She was anticipating not being able to leave the house at all. So she's not wanting to go to the local water source to get water to treat it with her filters if she had them, because she doesn't want to come in contact with other people who might infect her and kill her. Smart. Now, not everybody has a pond. Not everybody has a beaver pond. Not everybody has springs on their own property. Not everybody lives a rural lifestyle. She said that most people ignored her advice. Ignorance is a common default situation in our society today. You don't agree with me? Type into YouTube preppers and go through what YouTube suggests is our prepping videos to you. How many of those people are wearing beards at the end of April 2022 when we still have an airborne pandemic in effect, and you wouldn't realistically want to be in a store without an N95 on if you were actually a prepper? But I digress. So now she's worried, reasonably I would argue, about a nuclear war. Let's be realistic here. Most of us will be long dead before 30 days have expired after a full nuclear exchange. So having 12 years worth of food and water stored up in your bunker is probably a pointless waste of time for most people. The 30 days gives you the chance to survive a small exchange or relocate possibly, it gives you a potential. Having no supply gives you no chance. I just went and got these. You might want to prep, but you actually might want to read about stuff. I highly recommend this. Currently, Kitty's reading these. She hasn't started yet, but there is actually a US Army booklet on nuclear war survival, which she's currently reading. She's interested enough to start reading and prepping for this mentally and also by knowledge. Knowledge is very, very important. The last prepper featured is Dean, and he's a boy prepper, and he completely blows his OPSEC to gain fame. Dean's wearing greens in a suburban urban environment. If you're in a suburban urban environment and you actually want to have proper clothing on, I would suggest that you actually use blacks and greys without colours on them, and I wouldn't use a disruptive camouflage in an urban suburban environment. You might want to consider that later on, especially if it's been snowing, but initially and in normal times, wearing greens or camo in a suburban urban environment is a bit of a sign you're a bit of a nut. Dean claims he knew about COVID in late 2019. Good on him. I think I might possibly have heard about something in December of 2019 myself, but there again, I actually am a nurse. The mobile thing I find interesting. He for some reason figures the roads are going to be open for him. I'm going to assume he actually has a destination to go to, because no matter what you carry with you by bike, boat, car, truck, whatever you carry with you in a long ongoing emergency will run out. And the more you carry, the longer the period of time that will take, so that's a good idea, but the harder it's going to be to alter plans to move it. What the heck is this love affair with people's freezers and generators? For places like Puerto Rico that have frequent black and brownouts, I think they have a place. I have a gasoline generator here, and I have a store of gasoline, because even though we're off-grid, we have a propane generator, and there's issues sometimes with things failing. Everybody's going for generators. In an urban environment, I think you have a hard time running one safely in an ongoing situation. Certainly for a nuclear war or a massive pandemic killing lots of people, running a generator is going to attract a lot of attention. £700 sterling is roughly about $1,500 to $1,600 Canadian. £700 by weight is not that a lot of food. In fact, let's think about this. I got 3 shopping bags from a fairly cheap grocery store the other day, and that cost me about 220 Canadian dollars. So what he's saying here is he went and bought 9 to 10 shopping bags. I suspect food's more expensive in America and England than it is in Canada, but there you go. Dean drives a pickup truck. The fuel supply he's stored is not going to last long, especially if he's hauling heavy loads. I didn't see any, but I hope he has good bicycles. Huples law. All single-use materials are pointless in an ongoing SHTF situation. Propane stoves, etc., etc., normal batteries, etc., etc., have no place in long-term prepping, none. They're for short duration events only. If you're prepping for nuclear war or COVID-19 disaster, what you need to do is actually have like a wooden rocket stove, so you can actually chip off bits of wood from framing of abandoned houses and burn that and boil water in 20 minutes and maybe produce some electricity. Now this is not controversial to me, but you might hear this controversial. Stocking foil blankets, emergency survival blankets, is an utter pointless waste of time. The only point to them is to make a super survival shelter in a situation where there's going to be houses to walk into, or to cover up somebody who's in shock waiting for an ambulance to show up. However, full points to doing for having a Bear Grylls knife. These work really well. I got a set of these years and years ago from Costco at a very, very cheap price. I actually have a big hatchet and a lot of other stuff I got. And it's Gerber. And I carry this every day. And it works great. And I also have my Waypoint Survival steel. As much as I hate to say it, I do think in his case getting out of his suburban area is probably a great idea. But the stocks he shows me are not going to last him long at all. And will he be welcome where he's going? I hope so. Like just showing up in a rural location like this and parking at the side of the road or near somebody's field with your caravan and your preps, however well defended you think you are, is going to get you killed in a lot of long-term emergencies. If you don't know anybody, you're just an outsider from the city and you're not going to be tolerated. Well, there you have it. Ordinary Britons who are preppers now. One sign of the end times will be if I get 1,000 views on this. So like, share, subscribe, etc., etc. Send me your firstborn. But I think the more important thing is to think about this stuff. It's like, it's an interesting thing. Why is mass media showing these people? It's because it's a human interest story related to Brexit and also kind of ties in with Ukraine. So they're kind of setting up a scene that, you know, we know a lot of our audience will actually read this, because although they're not ever going to prep for this, they're getting a bit nervous about our government supplying weaponry to one side in a war that's killing the other side, and the other side happens to have a ton of nuclear weapons. So it is interesting that these types of articles are appearing, and it's one of the things you need to be scanning and monitoring for in terms of how accelerated your preps are. Right now, I'm not accelerating preps, I'm just buying a few things hither and thither. I did early on with my war plan actually increase the amount of medications I have over-the-counter meds to treat radiation issues and burns. So I've done a few things because of my war plan, but I'm still not at the point right now going, you know what, I need to spend a lot of money on food. Hopefully I'm not mistaken, hopefully I'm right, hopefully I don't need to. Toodles! This was a 2022 A Dog with His Llama production.